We must now try to sum up and put together what has been said above on the subject of imperialism. Imperialism emerged as the development and direct continuation of the fundamental attributes of capitalism in general. But capitalism only became capitalist imperialism at a definite and very high stage of its development, when certain of its fundamental attributes began to be transformed into their opposites, when the features of the period of transition from capitalism to a higher social and economic system began to take shape and reveal themselves all along the line. The fundamental economic factor in this process is the substitution of capitalist monopolies for capitalist free competition. Free competition is the fundamental attribute of capitalism and of commodity production generally. Monopoly is exactly the opposite of free competition, but we must have seen the latter being transformed into monopoly before our very eyes, creating large scale industry and eliminating small industry, replacing large scale industry by still larger scale industry, finally leading to such a concentration of production and capital that monopoly has been and is the result. Cartels, syndicates, and trusts, and merging with them the capital of a dozen or so banks, manipulating thousands of millions. At the same time, monopoly, which has grown out of free competition, does not abolish the latter, but exists alongside it and hovers over it, as it were, and, as a result, gives rise to a number of very acute antagonisms, frictions, and conflicts. Monopoly is the transition from capitalism to a higher system.
Also, if you roll 3 doubles in a row, you go to jail.
Yeah, personally, I prefer chutes and ladders, but to each their own. Lenore and I both had the same joke ready to go.
I tell you what, Marx didn't account for stepping on a snake and going back to 0.
Fuck.
Damn it.
It's like Lenin said.
What the need or what the need? How are the union and the socialist need? Everything I can need, oh I need, oh I need, oh I need, oh the workers need. Oh workers need. Oh workers need. Oh workers need. Oh.
Welcome back to Workers Lit, your favorite literature podcast about, what is it about? It's about fucking imperialism. It's about fixing the problems in our society by analyzing them closely, by getting theoretical. And then, like Marx said, the point of the philosophers, Marxist philosophers, should not be just to analyze the world, but to change it. So we're here today to bring you really the first theoretical work we've ever covered on this podcast. If you're worried from the opening, oh, this is going to be dense, this is going to be tough, don't worry. We're here to hold your hand. We're here to take you through it. We're here to make it fun. This is an important text for you to understand. This is Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. But before we get into it, Lenore and Jen, how y'all doing today?
Well, first of all, Lenore looks absolutely stunning today. Makeup
She does look
on
really
point. Good. Fucking killing it. The biolage is biolaging.
Can I ask what a biolage is?
You see how her hair is darker at the top and lighter at the bottom?
Okay. That's what that is?
That.
Okay. I didn't know. My gay card taken away. I didn't know what that was.
Well, no, Jacob, I only learned that word like last week as well, so you're not alone.
Okay.
You two are not gay enough.
We need
Look,
to
somehow I'm the gayest person on this podcast today. I don't know how that happened. Happy Pride to me, I guess.
I'm a Brokeback Mountain gay. I'm not a spa gay.
See, back to the ruggedness we were just talking about.
I've got not even a goatee. It's like barely anything today. But anyway, more than I normally have. But Lenore, how are you doing today?
I needed to go out and get my balls zapped today after that Supreme Court decision dropped, because like if something concrete like didn't change, like if something in my environment didn't move. Like I was, I don't know. The walls are closing in, and if you're able, electrolysis can make them feel a little bit further away.
Mm. It is June 30th, so some rough Supreme Court shit today, especially for trans people, as the context I was going to give. This is going to come out in a few days, but just for folks to know. What's our history with this book? I mean, we've all definitely read this one before. This is Lenin. This is the dog himself, the big
The
dog,
goat,
and we
the
will be
dog. What
talking.
animal is he?
He's the big dog. He
contains
would be a cat,
multitudes.
actually.
Lennon would definitely
had-
be a cat.
He had multiple cats. And
Yeah.
you know what he named his cats?
No.
It's one of my favorite facts
Trotsky?
about him. No, he didn't name his cats because he felt like he didn't have the right to inflict a name upon them because they probably had names of their own, so he could not know. Which is some
That's
real like
so
theater
woke.
kid, like that's
Autistic
so
king.
woke.
Autistic king.
That is really sick. Yes, I really appreciated that. I'm like, God, he's doing the plot of like Cats. He's like, oh well, at the Jellicle Ball, they're getting their name.
Mm.
I read this book maybe like 5 or 6 years ago and haven't fully reread it until just this last week, and I forgot how hard he goes on Kotsky, and it just
He hates his
warms
ass.
my heart. All of this fucking idiot. It's especially like chapter 9 is just like the fuck Kotsky chapter, and
Oh yeah,
I'm
where
here
he's
for
like,
it.
yeah, even like he like this nerd is incorrectly quoting like other Marxists. This nerd is incorrectly quoting like other fucking like bourgeois economists who like
Yeah.
even they have to admit what he doesn't. Like
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
He's
Lenin
wrong on every level.
Lenin is the informed hater we should all strive to be.
Yes, I appreciate in chapter 9 when Lenin says, "Didn't believe in magic till I saw my dog turn into a snake." that was really cool. I liked that a lot. Lenore, when did you first read this book?
I mean, roughly the same time as Jen, I think.
Yeah.
Right around I think a lot of us, after seeing the double blow of the total abdication of state responsibility in combating COVID, and the doubling down on armed agents of the state, after George Floyd, the total doubling down on police brutality, in the wake of the 2020 uprisings, a lot of us started looking for answers elsewhere, and this and State and Rev were a couple of the first texts that I read. Just because like Lenin is the guy and these are like the books that he read, obviously there are theoretical works that are more germane to our present condition, but like, eventually you do wrap back around to, okay, so why is the world the way it is and what is to be done?
Yes.
Right.
Fuck yeah. Something that I love about Marxism, about, like dialectical and historical materialism, about like studying these works is, I don't know if y'all have read volume 1 of Capital. I'm not suggesting we do it
Yeah.
for the podcast. I do not want to. But
There's
the
already
last
a great podcast on that.
That's
Reading
true. Also,
Capital
I
with
have a whole
Comrades.
video
You should listen to
series
that.
covering it as well. You should just listen to me talk.
Definitely.
But the final chapter of volume 1 touches on imperialism, and that book was written in like the 1850s, and it's a very, I don't want to use the word shallow, but it's like a very brief introduction to the idea of imperialism, because it wasn't even a huge global thing at the time, right?
Mhm.
And then Lenin writes this book in 1916 as he sees monopoly capitalism really starting to consolidate power, money, people, property, everything, right? Materials. And then you build on that, a few years later, and you get your Kwame Nkrumahs, and you get your Frantz Fanons, and you get more imperialism, more decolonial theory from people that lived under the boot of it. And it's just, I mean, it's a terrible thing, imperialism, but it really is beautiful the way we have this privilege of going back and reading these books and watching this
Yes.
develop. And through learning how it developed, we also learn how to destroy it. And
Mhm.
so this really is just like a part of that blueprint that we can then take as members of the imperial core, and of people that live in the like highest stage of capitalism country. It's really cool how we can analyze these things and put them into present context and destroy it from the fucking inside.
Well, and besides giving us the language in which to describe the world that we live in and its past and the future that we have to make of it, reading this stuff keeps us grounded because what you mentioned about capital touching on imperialism, right? This is on my mind because I'm also reading On Practice this week to discuss with Ray of Pearl's Pod. Shout out to them. But like, there's certain aspects of imperialism that Marx couldn't have addressed because the analysis that he was putting down wasn't tested in that arena yet. Lenin and Stalin had to come after him to get that done, and then you have Kwame Nkrumah expanding on Lenin in his way. Like nobody sketches everything out in exactly the way that it will go. Nobody's a prophet, and like keeping that in mind as you read these. It's very easy reading these to recall that and to stay grounded.
I mean, they could have just read the holy words of Joseph Smith, but instead of doing that, what I did was in around the same period, around 2019, 2020, I read it, engaged with it for the first time, but then I engaged with it more seriously because of a Discord book club that I got involved in during the pandemic. And I read this and I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't make me fucking weird. And it did, but for the better. And so, yeah, very similar story to y'all. And before we get into the substance of the book, because again, it's not as dense as you might think, especially not from the first chapter, but it has its moments of density. And we can, as people who've engaged with this before, help you through it, whether you end up reading it or not. It's good to know the concepts. But first, let's hear about the guy. You've certainly heard of him. His name.
Lenin. Did anyone ever hear of Lenin? Lenin, as they say in Russia.
Shut the fuck up, Donnie. V.I. Lenin. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov.
Lenin, as we know him, he was the first person really to take Marx's theories and adapt them to his current at the time, to his political conditions, and then use those ideas to liberate Russia from the Tsar in October of 1917. Obviously not himself, but he is, very much considered the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution.
Born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov on the 22nd of April, 1870, he was the third of 8 kids. His grandparents were former serfs. His family, in general, poor and working class. He was radicalized in university, like many of us, became a socialist, and was expelled for his organizing work, which is around the time when he started studying Marx. And
I
at
should
this time,
note too, I mean, he was radicalized as in he found Marxism around this period, but his
Mhm.
brother was executed by the Tsar when he was, I think, 8 years old.
Yes.
When Lenin was 8 years old, his brother was part of an anarchist sect that tried to assassinate the Tsar, failed, and was hanged. So that I imagine contributed to some of the frustration.
undoubtedly.
For sure.
Undoubtedly. So he started work as a legal assistant after graduating with honors once he got back into school. He moved to St. Petersburg in 1893. He worked as an assistant to a barrister, basically just what they call attorneys over in I think Britain has them.
A barrister, I think they have blue hair pronouns. They make me coffee.
That's basically
true.
what Lenore does.
Pretty much. An assistant
Lenore, barrister Lenore.
assistant to a barrister. He rose to a senior position in
Assistant to the regional barrister.
So he rose to the senior position in this Marxist revolutionary cell called the Social Democrats. They were named after the Marxist Social Democratic Party of Germany. And he championed Marxism, especially within this movement. He encouraged the founding of revolutionary cells in Russia's industrial centers to lay the ground of revolution. Here is where he also meets Nadezhda Krupskaya, who also went by Nadia. She was a school teacher, also Marxist. They would eventually marry.
Do you know the deal with how they got married?
No.
I'm sorry, I got to
In
interject.
exile, at least, yeah.
Yes. Well, first of all, everyone should read her book, Reminiscences of Lenin. It is not just her writing about and this is what my husband did. It's a lot of theoretical analysis, a lot of history, a lot of the shit she was doing. Her talking about making signs in a basement was very relatable. I was like, oh, we've always been doing this shit, huh? I thought that was lovely. But there was the part where basically both of them were going to get exiled to Siberia for their work. And she was like, well, we've got to continue doing both our theoretical work and organizing work. This dude is clearly like important and we work together well. I'm going to tell them we're engaged. So she told the guards, we're engaged. And then she was like, hey, man, sorry, we're engaged. And so they got married. They were together until they died.
I did not know
Honestly,
that. That's very cute.
name a better love story.
You
You
can't.
can't. This next part I found really interesting when I was reading about this. He traveled to Switzerland to meet with some Swiss Marxists. He traveled around Europe like a lot.
He got
Pre-Russian
kicked out a
Revolution.
lot too.
He got kicked out. Yes, he traveled because he had to.
He
But
had
when
he had haters.
when he was returning to Russia, he had a lot of quote unquote revolutionary publications on him. Today we might call these zines, maybe.
Oh man, you get thrown
I
in
don't
jail.
know.
You get thrown in jail for decades for having those.
You can get 30 years. To be fair, he only got 4. So let's
Damn.
just compare that to Texas nowadays. Tsarist Russia had a much lighter penalty for distributing propaganda than current Texas.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, he did not have a
Damn.
trial though. They exiled him for 4 years without a trial.
And then Krupskaya joins him. This is the period point where she's getting kicked out, and she's like, "Hey, we're actually supposed to be married." They get married together in 1898. In 1905, shit kicks off in Russia. There's the Bloody Sunday massacre in St. Petersburg. Now, this is a lot of people that were like, "Hey, we're hungry, we're miserable, we're getting our ass kicked in the Russo-Japanese War." And there was this belief among the populace that, okay, some of the businessmen, they're corrupt, some of the ministers, they're corrupt, but the Tsar, he's our great father, he's appointed by God. It's a very poorly educated population, very religious
Good Tsar,
population.
bad boyars.
Exactly. So you have people literally marching to the palace, holding up pictures of Tsar Nicholas, saying like, "Father, hear us," and they just thought if he only knew. Well, he knew, he didn't care. His guards fucking slaughtered them, and this triggered a revolution in Russia. Not a successful one, but a revolution nonetheless in 1905. And this is a lot around where the Tsar agrees to some liberal reforms. You have the first introduction of any kind of elections into Russia, though they are mostly shams. Lenin returns to St. Petersburg for a little while and is involved with the Social Democrats fighting. There's literal barricade fighting. A lot of crazy shit goes down. There are defections in the military, but it doesn't quite get there. The countryside and the city, they don't revolt at the same time, and you also have a split in the left, the Social Democrats into the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks are Lenin's faction, and so things don't quite come together. So there's this dual thing that happens where, yes, there are some liberal reforms, and also they unleash this guy Stolypin on the people, who becomes basically like the mass executor. They mass execute thousands of people. Lenin has to free the country again. In those days, they called nooses the Stolypin necktie because of the sheer number of people that got hanged. It was a bad time, so he had to take the fuck off and hang out in various European countries for a while again while they organized underground.
And then let's see. So then what Lenin was calling at the time, what a lot of these writers at the time were calling the First Imperialist War, which we now know as World War One, starts. It lasts from about 1914 to 1917. Lenin is arrested once again. He keeps getting in trouble for his loud mouth. This book was published. I had 2 different sources. One said 1916, one said early 1917. We do also know that the calendars have changed since then, so whatever, gray area.
Also, like writing versus publishing, it's
that is true too. Yes. So this book, Imperialism, that we'll be discussing today, comes out, and then in February of 1917 is when what we generally consider the Russian Revolution begins. It breaks out, and Lenin once again returns.
Somehow, Lenin returned.
We'll get around to it eventually. 10 Days That Shook the World.
Yeah.
But that period through to the October Revolution, roughly, and immediately after is what that book covers. There's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, there's a February Revolution, which displaces the Tsar, and then there's the October Revolution, which displaces the new elected liberal government. And the Bolsheviks take the W here. They were the one faction that was consistent in their demands for peace and land and bread, and this endears them to the public over the rest.
Oh, this is from the political program that came about like in October of 1917, and we don't have to read it verbatim, but it's basically talking about an armistice, an end to what we now know as World War One, as well as the fighting, the Civil War fighting on all fronts. He talks about transferring of land from the landlords to the peasants, essentially defending soldiers' rights, a complete democratization of the army, establishing workers' councils to control industry, and let's see, supplying the cities with bread and the villages with articles of necessity, and to secure all nationalities inhabiting Russia the right of self determination. Long live the revolution. I also like this idea of all nationalities inhabiting Russia, and like as Russia became, the Soviet Union, that was a huge part of it, is like making sure that all of these different, because Russia has a ton of different ethnicities. It's a huge landmass, right? Like a lot of people think of like the blue-eyed blonde hair Russians, but a lot of Russians look more like Chinese in a lot of ways. And so because it's such a huge landmass and these people have been on this forever, these people are native to the land, so
There's not a insubstantial like Arab descended population and Persian descended population in Russia either. I mean, there's a lot of
exactly.
Muslims,
Yeah, I
especially,
mean,
and
it's
then in the
huge.
Soviet Union there were a ton, but once
Mhm.
it expanded, so that
Yeah.
was of course quite relevant to the situation. Uh, so yeah, I mean, this is the period where the Bolsheviks take power. We are not going to go into detail about how the Bolsheviks take power, nor are we going to go into detail about the Soviet Union, both its successes and its flaws. That is not just one episode. That's like a lot of episodes. That's a whole
Mhm.
podcast, right?
That is
And there are.
that is our nonfiction half.
And that said, I will make sure to link some good resources in the notes if you would like to go ahead and read and listen more about what that was like, because I know some of you may be curious and there's a lot to talk about there. But this is an important context of leading right up to it. Lenin's analysis of why capitalism was unstable, why capitalism was leading to these horrible wars, and why these horrible wars weren't about to stop anytime soon. And to sort of conclude here, Lenin would then be sort of in charge would be the head of the first socialist state then for several years. He was, reportedly after I believe 4 months, that made the Soviet Union, then just called Socialist Russia, the longest existing socialist state after the Paris Commune. Lenin, reportedly a very serious man, ran out in the snow and started rolling around and cheering when they passed the Paris Commune. And this is not a goofy dude. This is a very serious, by most accounts, pretty unpleasant man. Not in like he was like evil or anything, just like not a fun guy to be around. He was stressed as shit. Apparently, he was like breaking out in hives all the time from anxiety. There's a great story about how like in like I think 1910, all the socialists forced Lenin to take a 2-week vacation where he wasn't allowed to work, and he was trying to sneak books with him. It's a good story. Krupskaya writes about it in Reminiscences of Lenin, because they were like, dude, you keep like having panic attacks. Like, you got to chill out.
The state has determined that you've never fucked around a day in your life.
Yes. Also,
Mhm.
if you ever feel like bad about having like mental health shit, this dude had some mental health shit going on. Like, so like he's a human being. These are not gods. These are just guys.
Yep.
Impressive guys,
And
but guys
because
nonetheless.
and because he was a human being, confined to a human shell, ultimately he would die of a stroke at the age of 53. Not very old at all. This on January 21st, 1924. That's roughly a year and change after the foundation of, like, because there's Russia from like 1917 to 1921. I believe it's December 31st, 1922 that the USSR is proclaimed. So yeah, about a year and change of running this thing, and like he's done.
Sad.
Look,
It
if you
killed
want to
him.
buy, there's of course the theory that he was poisoned, but I don't tend to subscribe to that. Though him being shot by that anarchist didn't help. A couple of years before, I'm sure that didn't help.
There's only one person I can think of who being shot helped, and it's Theodore Roosevelt.
Donald Trump.
He
if
did
you
not
just
get
count
shot.
if you just count the ear.
Please explain to me what he got out of the assassination attempt that he wouldn't have already done. I'm sorry.
I think he got a little bit. He got the picture of him holding the fist up and his ear bleeding,
Yeah,
which to a conservative goes pretty hard. No, I'm
it's
just
lightning
teasing.
in a bottle. They've already misplaced the bottle among, Pete Hegseth's other stash.
How many people do you think have that tattoo of him right after he got shot?
I saw somebody gave Trump a Cybertruck with that picture as a
Mm.
wraparound on it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what cracked me up was that Trump looked scared of it. It was really good.
Imagine giving Lenin a stagecoach with like the picture of him like with the fucking 1,000-yard stare in the wheelchair.
Oh God.
I hate that picture.
It's
But the
rough.
good one
It's
of him
rough.
giving that speech with his hand up, I would drive that stagecoach.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, Lenin, I mean, so many contributions, both practical and theoretical. But today we're talking about one of, if not his most important works, which is Imperialism, his analysis of the stage of capitalism they were living in at the time. And the stage of capitalism, though it has evolved in certain ways, that we are still under.
So I couldn't help but think of Ben Norton while reading this. Not to compare like people living today to like Lenin, right? But like in the way that you'll see Lenin cribbing heavily from like bourgeois scholars, right? John Hobson of Britain, Rudolf Hilferding of Austria, right? These people have already like written out, analyses of imperialism and of the development of finance capital. And so, he's using, Parenti did this too, right? He's using a recognizable tactic of socialist theorists here, which is look like the bourgeois economists, the bourgeois thinkers have already laid this out. I'm just analyzing like objective truth from an angle that benefits working people broadly.
Well, let's get into it then. Chapter 1. We're going to go through not chapter by chapter, but I've broken up our notes into sections, and I'm sure we'll bounce around a little bit, but we'll try to move through it for you. Chapter 1 is called Concentration of Production and Monopolies. And I'm going to be real with you folks. It's a Marxist tradition for the first chapter to be the hardest one to get through.
Yes.
It's not a work of theory if the first 10 pages don't make you want to die. In the first few pages of this, it is very much, and at the time it would have probably been mildly more interesting because he was citing contemporary figures, but he's basically making the point of, hey, look, the money, I'm not going to cite the money figures to you now because they're meaningless to us now. It's over 100 years old. But look, a few years ago, there were all these companies with all this money, and they continue to consolidate into smaller and smaller amounts. Only a few big companies in each of the big countries, they're becoming more international, they're collecting more workers, they're getting more money, and they're using up more energy and resources versus the smaller producers. He is making the argument, an argument that would seem, I think, honestly now quite benign because it is just a thing that we have accepted as a feature of capitalism, saying, hey, capitalism isn't just a free market. It is a thing that will always move towards monopoly if shit isn't done about it, and the free market will eventually be eliminated. In the same way that Marx at the beginning of Das Kapital says, hey, capital is the free market. You would think Marx kind of fucked with capitalism if you read the right passages from Das Kapital, because he's like, look at all this amazing shit it's made. He's making the point of it's great at making productive forces and it's not great at distributing them. And Lenin's like, that period is actually coming to a close as these monopolies consolidate and the actual benefits of competition start to fade away. That is Lenin's point. And in fact, this has become so accepted now that smart countries have antitrust laws. It literally has become accepted as a feature of capitalism, but at the time was quite controversial.
Yeah, and not smart countries, US, allow for that to just get worse and worse. You see that media chart of who owns what media. And it's 3 companies essentially own all of the media that you even really have access to, other than this podcast. Subscribe to our
Except
Patreon.
Workers Lit.
But you look at that, even things like Procter and Gamble, right, owns everything. Even when I was a kid, Johnson and Johnson was its own company, right? And now it's under this umbrella. Burt's Bees was its own company, and now that was bought by Johnson and Johnson, that falls under this other umbrella, right? And so these things just consolidate and consolidate and consolidate to the top.
Yeah, Wachovia bought by SunTrust by
The way I see it, if you're going to proctor, you shouldn't be gambling at the same time. You should focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, you should be procting her.
Yeah, exactly.
Proctor, I hardly know her.
Yeah, exactly right.
But yeah,
Proctor, but I love her.
It's there's a lot of statistics that transplanted from there to here are not of themselves relevant. But I will say these first couple of chapters, well, it gets moving a little more once you start talking about banks. But like the first chapter
Certainly.
especially, and also like the preface of the French and German editions where he goes into railways, right? Where he talks about railways, think about AI, think about the internet, right? From the preface of the French and German editions, railways are a summation of the basic capitalist industries, coal, iron, and steel, a summation and the most striking index of the development of world trade and bourgeois democratic civilization. And from here, he goes into, okay, this is how these industries have been consolidated. This is how these are, this is the tendency toward monopoly guiding this technology that is uniting the world, but the class character of it means that it's only being used for oppressive purposes. Again, it's if you just replace railways with internet, you're on the same page he is.
And you might be thinking, but Workers Lit podcast. Actually, in some countries, capitalist countries, monopolies get broken up into smaller companies that then have to cooperate, and that's true. And Lenin addresses that and says, actually, sometimes it's more useful for them to have smaller corporations that operate together with the same people on the boards. Mm-hmm. And also sometimes are shell corporations. And he gets into that when he talks about the banks. And this is the part where I have to talk about a job I used to have. I used to work for Glass Lewis. This was a 6-month job for me.
Isn't that the guy that you fight in Punch-Out?
Yeah. Glass jaw, but he hits hard. Glass Lewis is a corporation that does corporate compliance. Basically, if you're a stockholder, you're like, hey, I'm going to invest money, or I currently hold money. Can you please investigate this company to see that like they're not lying about like their revenue? And also, if you're one of those conscientious stockholders, quote unquote, can you check their environmental shit, whatever. So that was my job. My job was making sure companies were quote unquote ethical. Let me tell you, the boundaries for what ethical were quite broad. Though a lot of times they still failed those boundaries. And what I saw in that process was a lot of companies in the same field, especially like transportation, communication, media times 10, food. If they were not owned by the same people, you saw the same last names on the board a lot. Sometimes they were the exact same people. Sometimes they were family members, especially if they were in the Northeast. You saw the last name Kennedy quite often. You could see the last name Rockefeller quite often in certain parts of the country, right? Descendants of different groups. DuPont, quite a common one, especially in like plastics and water, things like that. So as Lenin identifies, banking, hedge funds, things like this would eventually make this process a little more complicated and a little less cut and dry than just, oh, there's a company called General Everything that owns everything. Not quite. Sometimes it's more complicated, but I'm telling you, this is a consolidated class. And that's something I saw. That job did make me want to die because I had to review C-suite executive salaries and compare them to the average employee at the company. And that was done because a lot of these conscientious investors didn't want the C-suite salary to be more than, hear me here. They were like, listen, we want it to be ethical. So as long as it's not more than 250 times more than their average employee salary, we're fine with that. And pretty much every company failed that metric. Pretty much every company.
I thought you were going to say like 2025.
250.
Jesus Christ.
And they failed that metric consistently. Anyway,
cool.
That's chapter 2 and chapter 3. That's the banks and their new role in finance, capital, and financial oligarchy is that more complicated way of capital functioning and consolidating. And y'all could potentially talk about the role of how the banks evolved, but I just wanted to share that related anecdote that made me be like, that was like 2022. And I was like, well, if I wasn't sure Lenin was right before, Jesus Christ. Y'all are lucky I didn't do a Luigi in that period. I was losing my mind looking at those numbers all day. I mean, Luigi's innocent, but you know what I mean, in theory.
Sure. I like This is in chapter 2, I think. He talks about when all this like consolidation is happening, specifically with the banks. And I like the terminology he uses here: ascertain, control, and entirely determine. So first you ascertain the positions of the various capitalists, and then you can control them and influence them by restricting or enlarging, facilitating or hindering their credits. And then finally, you can entirely determine their fate, determine their income, deprive them of capital, or on the other hand, permit them to increase their capital. So when you are the banks and you control all of the capital, and then also you own these companies, like who can tell you what to do? Nobody but you. It's actually quite clever of the capitalists, the way they were able to merge all of these things and consolidate their power so perfectly.
I would say too that it's even evolved since Lenin's day into the form of hedge funds, which weren't
Mm-hmm.
exactly a thing at that point. Lenin is referring often to just banks that are like, we will loan you this much money if you put our guy on the board and you follow X rules. He uses a few examples of banks pulling credit for companies that don't behave like they want them to. That still happens, certainly. But what we also see now is we have the development of hedge funds, which is a place where billionaires who, why should they have to put their money in the normal bank like the rest of us, park their vast wealth in places like BlackRock, that then with trillions of dollars of assets, a few people manage these fucking huge financial firms. And in fact, who was it? I mean, this is not conspiracy. This is just true. Who was it that managed Leon's Black's money at a hedge fund as well as many other people? Fucking Jeffrey Epstein. So this shit actually gets tied together into some of the worst excesses of capital as well. Some of the most like horrible stuff is allowed to emerge because, as Lenin identifies, less and less guys get power to control more and more capital
Yeah,
and do
yeah.
greater and greater abuses of power.
Lenin, release the Epstein files.
Well, Lenin did release a lot of files on Tsarist Russia and the abuses that were doing then. That was one of their main programs, was actually opening the files and saying, here's all the abuses that were happening. So in a way, he did release the files.
I guess we'll have to do that after our revolution.
That's my
I
promise.
can't wait to release the Area 51 files and
on the Workers Lit podcast. It'll be a Workers Lit exclusive.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, we only know about COINTELPRO like definitively because of that building takeover by the AIM in the
That's true.
50 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Yeah, more of that, please. But yeah, so these two chapters where Lenin gets into finance capital, right, and the financial oligarchy that grows out of it, right. The bank's money, which has to be transformed into industrial capital, is called finance capital, right? It's capital controlled by banks and employed by industrials. This is the credit that the bank loans you, so you can do your industry, right? And like any institution, like any corporation, a bank has to ensure a return on its investment for their shareholders. So that's how you see these companies that rely on this capital and these extensions of credit are incentivized to do vertical integration, right? To eliminate trade between the various stages of processing, like raw materials to finished goods, for example, right? But Lenin says here, to return to chapter 1, we've been bouncing around quite a bit. He says here that like a figure like 3,000 giant enterprises in like 250 branches of industry being consolidated into fewer and fewer entities, that alone doesn't illustrate what's going on here. And he brings up what's called combination, right? This vertical integration of stages of production into a single enterprise. So fluctuations of trade, and indeed trade itself, can be eliminated if over the various stages of production you're essentially negotiating with yourself, right? Pure enterprises, right? Those are subject to drops in prices of raw materials, for example, as opposed to manufactured goods. Combined enterprises don't have this problem. And again, like this combination is incentivized to ensure a more stable rate of profit. Not only for you, the CEO, but also for the bankers and the shareholders who are depending on your balance sheet to go up and up and up.
Line go up.
For instance, well, it would cost a lot of money if, say, satellites in space had to transmit via, communication lines that were owned by someone else and then were used on a social media platform owned by a third person. But what if they were all under a company called XAI and they all operated horribly? Then you could make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
There's an example. That's all we call that vertical integration in the United States. So that's a little bit more of a different thing in a way. But like the more you consolidate shit, the more it works. And he also identifies there are these things, cartels, he calls them, or like conglomerates, where there are companies that enter into unofficial or official sometimes agreements on how they're going to operate. See the career of perhaps our future president, though I hope not, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I never know which one it is. When he worked at McKinsey, got all of the big ag companies and food companies to agree on a mutual raise in bread prices. That was a thing that his corporation worked on. He denies having part of it. Evidence suggests otherwise. But regardless, McKinsey, also a hedge fund and consulting firm, did this exact thing. It was a sort of cartel of people saying, if we all raise our prices at once, then the free market can't touch us. Once again, free enterprise completely eliminated. Now, Lenin then will say, so you say, oh, wow, we got to go back to the old days of capitalism. And he's like, no. One, this is capitalism's natural trajectory. This is where it heads. If somehow you broke up everything, which the United States and other places have tried a few times, as has been seen, they will consolidate again. You have to keep fucking whack-a-mole style breaking them up. And he says the alternative is this shows that production naturally socializes, naturally centralizes. In fact, they are building us the perfect mechanisms to just hand control to a people's state. In fact, this is ideal. If this was democratized, you just made it a lot easier. A million little industries are very, very difficult to democratize. One gigantic industry is quite easy to like let the people who work there vote on and like be controlled by like, public policy. So Lenin is making the point of like, I mean, we're not praising the monopolists, but they are, as Marx said they would, selling us the rope that will hang them.
I just wanted to drop a like Ma Bell, I got the ill communication.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Breaking up those monopolies.
I should throw out one more thing. At this period in history, we did not have the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, though Lenin kind of actually nods at things like this probably going to emerge in the coming decades and later chapters.
Yes.
And chapter 2 and chapter 3, I was thinking, oh my God, Lenin would lose his mind if he heard about the World Bank and the IMF and what they're able to do as forces of capital to control policy on a national scale. So, and we could talk a little bit more about that later on, but I had to throw that out there, that this is also the natural process of this.
Yeah, just following on from what you're saying, like over here on page like 77, 78, right? Lenin's quoting Hobbes in here when he says, "We have foreshadowed the possibility of even a larger alliance of Western states, a European federation of great powers, which, so far from forwarding the cause of world civilization, might introduce the gigantic peril of a Western parasitism, a group of advanced industrial nations whose upper classes drew vast tribute from Asia and Africa, with which they supported great tame masses of retainers, no longer engaged in the staple industries of agriculture and manufacture, but kept in the performance of personal or minor industrial services under the control of a new financial aristocracy." And then he goes into like this happening on like a micro scale in like southern England, for example. Yeah, there's a lot in here that very correctly calls the formation of the European Union, the forwarding of like the fucking abundance bullshit, as the petty bourgeois Democrats, as he would have called them, say, well, like we can just like build more things, we can keep the current financial hierarchy in place, but make it do good things. It's all very, very easy to trace and to predict.
Yes.
Listeners, one free month of the Patreon to the first person who emails in a good edit of Lenin dunking on Ezra Klein. Thank you.
All right. Are we going to chapter? Are we in chapter 4 yet? We're okay.
Yeah, we're in chapter 4 now. I mean, we touched on some of
4.
this. Basically, this chapter 4, the export of capital, says concentration of capital leads to overproduction and surplus, right? Too much stuff. This means, one, you either have to cut prices. No, capitalists don't like that. Or they have to export it to underdeveloped countries that cannot make that stuff for themselves or have to make it at a more expensive rate. And so this leads to a dependency from these countries on that. And it should also be noted that then the countries have an imperialist relationship, both as now they are sort of the person who owns the debt, they are the person that exports to them. And should that country want to change the relationships, say maybe Haiti in the 1990s, trying to create a domestic wheat and corn industry, the sort of state that is dominating that state then has an interest for its own financial reasons to crush that development. In short, that country can only be an exporter of raw materials and a provider of cheap goods. It cannot be allowed to develop an advanced or sophisticated economy.
And I like just the first sentence of this chapter. Under the old type of capitalism, when free competition prevailed, the export of goods was the most typical feature. Under modern capitalism, when monopolies prevail, the export of capital has become the typical feature. So you're not even exporting like finished items to trade with, which is what I think even people that consider themselves capitalists, they're workers and they're just not educated. But people that like support capitalism are like, they think that capitalism is just commodity exchange, right? It is just like the buying and selling of goods rather than, this whole structure. But at this point of it, we're not even buying and selling goods. We are just exporting capital itself.
Right. Yeah, worth noting here. There's an extract from 4 that I quite like. Again, we mentioned like capitalism doesn't just raise the living standards at home, right? It's going abroad because all the raw materials have already been cornered. All the markets have already been. All the demand has already been generated. We need to go elsewhere and repeat the process. Quoth Lenin, if capitalism could develop agriculture, it could raise the living standards of the masses, who, in spite of the amazing technical progress, are everywhere still half-starved and poverty-stricken. There could be no question of a surplus of capital. But if capitalism did these things, it would not be capitalism, for both uneven development and a semi-starvation level of existence of the masses are fundamental and inevitable conditions and constitute premises of this mode of production. Capitalism always has to have an underclass that's being exploited for its labor power, and it goes in search of new populations to do this too. Incidentally, this is why China cannot be described as capitalist, because it's taking the profits that it has capitalists, but they are bound by the laws of their socialist government to reinvest in home and effect a gradual raising of standards.
Yeah, take that, people who called us bourgeois for saying that China needs to work on its LGBT policy. See, we are nuanced.
This is what capitalists use their surplus capital for. They increase profits by exporting it to less developed countries where capital is scarce, land and raw materials are cheap, wages are low, right? This happens, again, as I touched on, when capital can't profitably invest in its home country.
Now, I do want to address something that Lenin repeats a couple times that, if is not wrong, then at least has changed. I wouldn't call it wrong because it was true when he wrote it, but capitalism did make some adjustments in agriculture in the decades following this. He does say a few times that capitalism cannot develop agriculture. You have to understand from the perspective, and Lenin's not a prophet. You have to understand from the perspective of a Russian person living in the 1910s, where the capitalists were super interested in like making guns, and they would build it over like fertile fields when people were starving. This was a good analysis. Now, advancements in agriculture did happen with things like fertilizer and shit like that have changed the way food surplus works. That happened for a few reasons. Some of that is development in capitalist countries. I should also note some of that happened from science in the Soviet Union, which had exported to a lot of the world. I highly recommend people look into the seeds of Stalingrad. Literally, there was a gigantic cache of early genetically changed seeds that were kept and protected throughout the Battle of Stalingrad that eventually led to like flourishing around the world of like heat resistant and like flood resistant seeds. It's a very interesting story. And there were guys who starved to death guarding those seeds, even though they could have eaten them and lived. because they knew how important they were during during the siege and Battle of Stalingrad. Very interesting story. I'll link some information on that in the show notes. So that is also connected to that as well. But regardless, he is identifying here that surplus does not fix the problems in the home country. And we see that here. Like, I mean, in fact, surplus fucks up capitalism. Folks might remember those videos of like thousands of not thousands, millions of potatoes being like burned in pits in 2020
Oh
because
yeah,
they
all the milk
couldn't sell
dumping.
them.
All that milk.
Milk
Yeah,
dumping.
that's what I
There's a
remember.
horrific video of a I think it was in Belgium, an Amazon distribution facility, that like these laptops that were quite good were gonna like fall to be like $140 a piece because they were so cheap. And so Amazon ordered the destruction of like 5,000 laptops, just like smashing them with hammers.
Look, capitalism breeds innovation. Okay.
Mhm. I mean, I talked to a guy who worked in a factory, not a factory, but like a distribution facility, where they were told to take apart and destroy COVID tests and like
Oh,
and different things around that, because there had been so many of them produced and imported and whatnot, and there had been so much money for it that they were just having to give them away practically, and they couldn't do
Mhm.
God
that.
forbid. God forbid we get things we need for free.
Exactly. And so we see the dual truths. One, Marx's praise of capitalism's capacity to make these gigantic systems to
Mhm.
produce things. But then, of course, Marx and Lenin's critique of, okay, but then the thing runs up against the wall of it no longer follows the logic. And now we have to mathematically do something different, or people start behaving in deeply irrational and violent ways. And that is how we get to chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, the division of the world among capitalist powers, the division of the world among the great powers, and imperialism as a special stage of capitalism.
Yeah, worth noting. There are a lot of firms, there are a lot of states engaged in the export of capital to elsewhere. Eventually, they run up against each other, right?
Mhm.
And to illustrate this, at the beginning of chapter 5, right, what Lenin does here, he's like, so American and German oil and electric trusts basically split the world in half. There was an attempt by Germany to establish a state oil monopoly to do an end run around this agreement. And he goes into German bourgeois economists admitting that, yeah, the establishment of such monopolies is not in fact for the benefit of the consumer, but for the firm, right? He also talks about like shipping, rail trusts signing non-compete agreements. This is where bourgeois writers and like people like Kautsky chime in, like, well, like cartelization is good because then everything's been divided up, so everybody's figured out how things are to be arranged, and like everybody's happy. Nobody wants to rock the boat with like war or something. And the experience of the First World War, of course, proves that this is not the case, right? And I like this this bit here by which he refutes this. The forms of the struggle may and do constantly change in accordance with varying, relatively specific and temporary causes. But the substance of the struggle, its class content, positively cannot change while classes exist. The substance is the division of the world. And like, this isn't out of malice, like, engaging in like trade war and like actual war. But because of the degree of concentration these firms, these states have reached, forces them to do so to continue to obtain ever-growing profits, right? You have to understand everything in the world in the context of the contours of its economic division, right?
Right. Lenin failed to consider how profitable war would be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he didn't. That's the thing. Lenore, I do like that. We're so far past it now, but you did say Lenin talks extensively about shipping, and I just briefly had a moment of Lenin being like, "Drary is a bourgeois ship," and the correct anyway.
I mean, Drary is a bourgeois ship. You're shipping a
is.
cop with a fucking aristocrat.
Yes,
Well,
exactly
actually, they're
right.
both cops by the end. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
no surprise there.
Mhm.
Everyone knows
but
the
yes,
correct ship is Harry and Dobby.
and not to like breeze things along, but he dovetails this very nicely into chapter 6, where like, okay, so what's driven the rise of colonialism, right? What has driven this expansion of capital, and when is this taken place? And he notes that like the division of like the scramble for Africa, as we learned about it in school, and of like Polynesia, right? That's the most drastic territorial reshuffle of the period from 1876 to 1900, right? So the characteristic feature of this transition to imperialism is the final partition of the globe. There are no more unoccupied territories. And this intensification of colonial policy is observed precisely in the era of finance capital, right? Pre-monopoly capitalism has had its period. The 1860s and the 1870s, or where your standard like boom-bust cycle, has resulted in this consolidation. And this is where you get people like Cecil Rhodes saying, "Oh, if you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialists." It's, in the outline here, it's very aptly described as like Lebensraum before it requires that specific name, right? I do like how he describes Cecil Rhodes as a somewhat more honest social chauvinist.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's an important point where they're like, listen, we have mathematical lines that we run up against. We
Mhm.
run into a point where either the capitalists can't make a profit, or we're just, doing what one hates to give Orwell his flowers, but like doing what Orwell describes in 1984 as making a bunch of resources, dropping it in a pit, and then setting it on fire, which incidentally does happen from time to time. But
Mhm.
like, basically, we have to do something with this. What's also a fact is that if a country decides, out of, let's say, the goodness of their heart, uh, to not be imperialist, right? We've reached this stage of capitalism where now the line cannot go up without us going outside our borders.
Mhm.
And they decide, well, I'm not going to. Guess what? They become a fucking colony, right? If they
Mhm.
don't give up
Mhm.
capitalism, if they don't move into a new stage, if they don't change things, because they're never going to evolve past that without crushing their own workers and eventually growing class conflict. You cannot both continue to pay your workers the same wage and give them the same standard of living
Mhm.
and continue to grow forever without doing some form of imperialism if you are going to hold on to this idea of private property and not socializing the profits that you make from like the shit you do. And thus, as Lenin says, Lenin uses the term, some people say, he says, quote, that imperialism is the bad habit of some capitalists in some countries, end quote. And of course, these people should be derided as monsters when they do imperialism, but there is also a mathematical and structural reason why
Right.
people keep following that. From fucking Japan to Germany to the United States, the UK to France. Why do different countries with such dramatically different cultures and political systems act that way? Because that is the rules of capitalism.
Yes. Here he says, finance capital does not want liberty, it wants domination. And that is a quote from Hilferding. He's talking about the necessity of exporting capital also necessitates colonialism, right? Like these things
Mhm.
go hand in hand. So you can't just export capital without having like a colony to export it to. He says it's sometimes it's the only possible way by monopolist methods to eliminate competition, to make sure of orders, and to strengthen these necessary quote unquote connections, right?
Right.
Later on in it, he's talking about like the dividing up of Africa being like complete by the year 1900, and that like 90% of the African continent was divided up by these colonial entities, and this is obviously before Walter Rodney, who very much expands on this in the way that African colonization basically supported Europe's entire like development during this time period by taking everything from these colonies, the labor, the resources. And still to this day, that is very much what is happening in large swaths of the global south.
Right, right, and as well, not only the necessity of securing greater profits in markets where it's easier to do so is driving this, but you also see a deliberate use of this as like a release valve for like
Mhm.
working class people who can like be given an opportunity to participate in this. The energy which is being hurled out of the definite class channel must be given employment abroad in order to avert an explosion at home. Couldn't help but think of King Leopold's Ghost, where he talks about all the third sons, all the people who don't otherwise have a leg up in at home in the imperial core. Now they can seek their fortune as
Mhm.
functionaries and foot soldiers in say the Belgian Congo, where they can do
Mhm.
pretty much whatever they like to the local populace.
Yes.
We
And
also
what will
mentioned
happen
this.
is fucking Germany, Lebensraum. I mean,
Mhm.
Right.
like, that's will be literally the theory with which Germany uses to justify its
Mhm.
attempted conquest of, like, I mean, a lot of places, but specifically Eastern Europe. Is it's like, well, we have to have a place to send our sons and
Right.
and,
No,
and to
it's
so
Zionism. It's manifest destiny. It's all of
Mhm.
that
that was
shit. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah, the
Nazi
United
Germany turning the
States.
Volga into its own Mississippi.
The
Yeah.
United States
And
did that, and of course, Israel is doing that today.
it's something that I think is also important, not like necessarily in our context, but like in general for people to think about, is like the Nordic model gets like so much fucking praise from Americans. And like I get the knee jerk reaction because like they do have nice things, right? Like they have nice retirement plans. They have good health care. They have affordable housing. They don't have homeless people for the most part, right? Like they have really good things, but that is done off of the backs of the global south still to this day. Those
Hmm.
countries still have colonies. They still haven't paid reparations to the African nations that they stole all of this wealth from. And so the only way to actually right those wrongs is, you know, for socialism, for communism to actually take hold in the global north and pay those reparations to all of the people around the world that have been stolen from and murdered and wronged for this system.
Hmm.
Not to say there's not a lot we can learn from like some of the policies of those countries. They seem to have figured out some cool shit, but like obviously ultimately if you are operating like, you know, sovereign wealth funds that are drawing a bunch of stuff out of slave labor from Africa, you should
That's
not
bad.
do that.
That's bad.
That's
Yeah.
that's bad actually, right? And also, even if you don't want to look at it in moralistic terms,
Mm.
you will eventually pay for that because those people will not want you to do that, as Lenin identifies. Lenin, while he of course had a moral sense, very rarely talks about morality either in this
Mhm.
book or in his other works because he sees this as a development of science. The last
Mhm.
thing I'll say before we move on is if you are in Maine, at the if no no there's a reason for this, at the Fox Bramble Theater Company in Maine, friend of the pod AJ Diddy currently has a show running called Heart of Duckness about the division up of Africa at the 1884 Berlin Conference, where all of the imperialists are ducks, like
That's cute.
animals, like quacking ducks. And it starts as kind of a comedy and it gets increasingly darker, is my understanding. Uh,
Nice. I
and
thought
the
you were about to
description
shout out
says,
your favorite Maine imperialist that's running for
no, no.
Congress.
And he says every character is a duck and we're all corkscrewed by their
Nah,
decisions. Uh,
that's gross.
shout out to AJ. He'll be
Yeah,
on the
he's
pod
cool.
in a
We should
few
have him on
weeks.
the show in the near future. Yeah.
Yeah, we should have him on the show in 3 weeks. Checks
Corkscrewed is
watch.
fucking funny.
I shout out. So let's see. I should also note he makes a really good point here. Of being like, yeah, Germany's like doing this, but both Germany and Japan are a little late to the game. They might have to do some really violent stuff to catch up.
Hmm.
Interesting point there.
Hmm.
And then we get into something that I find really, really interesting, which is parasitism and the decay of capitalism in chapter 9. This idea that super profits from imperialism can be used to bribe the upper layer of the working class and basically bring working class beliefs in line
Super
with their
profits, as
ruling
in like
class.
those profits collected over and above, like just what you get from your own working class. The stuff that you get from exploiting working classes abroad, that's the super profits.
And he also believes that this leads to a sort of stagnation where these countries now, as like rentiers, as fucking landlord countries, no longer have the need to develop and grow and pursue greater and greater things because they can just fucking like coast on these other countries and just exploit the shit out of them. The first part definitely happened. I will say, like, technological developments do continue to happen, but like also what interests do they serve is a real question. And that parasitism is very real. And as we also see, unfortunately, there are a lot of working class people who continue to align with the ruling class for this very reason.
Yes, that happens locally. He talks about it happening here, like in the imperial core. Not a term he uses, but a modern term. So we see that all the time in what we would consider like the labor aristocracy, right? People that are working class, but because they have access to more treats because of a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's because of their race, especially here in the
Yes.
U.S. But also just because I live in a city that is full of fucking tech bros that are workers. They're working class. They don't own shit, but they consider themselves capitalists. They cry when billionaire dies because they see themselves in that, right? They support the system because of that. But we also see it in the colonies as well, in the bourgeois the bourgeois class of the colonies that side with the imperialists because it benefits them also.
Mhm.
And we can think of this, in the colonialism sense, but I also like to think of it as like, like South Vietnam during the American War of Aggression in Vietnam, the people that sided with the Americans because they saw that as benefiting their class status, as if they side with the capitalists, they will, I mean, they thought they would win, right? They thought the American military wouldn't lose that. And so they sided with it and became, they took arms against their own people because they saw it as a personal financial benefit for themselves.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
Lenin even identifies that Britain conquered most of India and most of the fighting was done by Indians, right?
Yes. Yes.
He identifies this as he calls it like I think he uses the term like unique or strange or something like that feature of imperialism is
Mhm.
that ability to divide and conquer. And I mean, like, that it was done in Africa, that's been done everywhere, that like
Mhm.
imperialism has been a thing. Use the sort of excess, use the sort of veneer of invincibility, buy
Mhm.
specific people off, make it seem like it's inevitable, play up local ethnic and religious and whatnot divisions, and divide and conquer. It's horrible shit. uh and another reason, and I think we see this over and over, why you really should never trust these imperialist countries. You really should never make deals with them, which I
Mhm.
think has become increasingly obvious. Like how many people have made deals like, okay, well, I'll be your puppet in this region or whatever, only for them
Mhm.
to get like Saddam Hussein later on. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
It's a tale as old as not time, but imperialism.
The 48th or 49th time that we conclude the war with Iran, like that'll be the one that sticks.
Right, exactly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And no hate to no hate to Ukraine. They're going through a hard time right now. But Zelensky,
Mhm.
I fear you may be next.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
guy does not. I do not predict a good end for that fella.
No, he's an
No.
imperialist running dog, and I mean,
Yes.
we're not going to get into the
Yeah.
Russian-Ukraine
Yeah.
war,
No.
but
No hate to
yeah.
the Ukrainian
Not
people
yet.
is what I mean.
And the way as well that this division is effected, right, between the upper stratum of workers, the lower stratum of the proletariat proper, how this is sold to us here in the imperial core as like natural, right? Like
Mhm.
he talks on page 79 about how, okay, there's this former chunk of the proletariat, this minority of the proletariat, and they are spoken of as the whole, right? Or the only part of the
Mhm.
proletariat worth paying attention to, right? Think about how like the working class in the United States is invariably described as like an aesthetic, right? And
Mhm.
not in terms of like material relationship to production, right?
Mhm.
You can grow up.
Carhartt jackets.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. You can grow up white and wealthy and go and like fight for Blackwater and like own a very successful oyster farming business, and be considered,
Working
you can,
class.
yeah, you can be petty bourgeois and yet be considered working class because like you're a scruffy white guy, right?
Lenore, why are you describing my backstory right now? We're talking about
Jacob,
Graham
I didn't know.
Plattner.
I didn't know you
Yeah,
had an oyster farm.
my oyster business is booming, baby.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
oyster business fucking like 300 miles inland.
300
Yeah, it's
miles
really
inland,
good.
but he does sell pearl necklaces.
I do. Fucking fucking Atlanta oysters.
Oh God.
Nasty ass shit. I
But
grow
yeah,
them in my basement.
my point being, like the way that these things are talked about then is very very similar to the way these things are talked about and naturalized now.
Mhm.
This is why this sort of thing is relevant. I swear, like if again. We make no bones about the fact that yeah, this is like a dense like 100 or so pages. But if you read through this, I promise you, you will see parallels to what's going on
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
And
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
oh, I was just gonna say we haven't used the word that he uses here, but it's opportunists. These people
Yes.
are opportunists. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I mean, this is also around the period where, I mean, the point where he really goes in on Kautsky, who is this
Mhm.
guy that he used to be theoretically aligned with. In fact, if you read his earlier work, I believe even What Is to Be Done, he cites Kautsky a few
Uh-huh.
times. But
Oh
Kautsky
yeah.
changes his position over the years. Much like a lot of people on the Marxist left, gets tired of getting his ass kicked.
Sure.
And it is a bummer. It is that meme of the guy that's like trying to get through to the diamonds, and he's just got to hit one more time, and he's going to get there.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but like Kautsky basically is making this case of like, oh well, there's this going to be this thing called super or ultra imperialism, and ultra imperialism is going to be this thing where actually there's not war anymore, and actually what we need to do is like, you know, do like liberal democracy within ultra imperialism. And Lenin says, in a term that sounds very like Twitter-esque, he goes, I call it ultra nonsense. And I was like, got his ass, cooked him. Cooked his ass for real, for real. He also says Kautsky is peddling stupid little fables. And I'm like, damn, bro came out of nowhere.
Lenin is
with
the
that one.
ultimate poster.
Oh my god, he would maybe have gotten nothing done if he had Twitter, and so it's probably a good thing that he didn't.
Yeah.
Someone did point out that Lenin kind of looks like a Reddit mod, and that upset me, but they're not wrong. He had a hard life, okay?
Yeah. Always.
What else do we need to say? Oh, and it talks more about the inevitability of war as a result of these countries that, with their interests, line needing to go up, but the whole world conquered, must then grab others' territory or grab independent territory that is guarded by independent states for the sake of line go up.
Line go up.
We can conceive of this. It is interesting how this changes after World War II, because you then get two blocks, a socialist bloc or a socialist aligned bloc and a capitalist Western bloc. And then you get these non-aligned states that some of them are socialist, some of them are like mixed economies, whatever. There's all kinds of different stuff going on. But in sort of since the fall of the Soviet Union, you've had the United States increasingly encroaching on all these countries to try to sort of seize control over them, seize power over them. And you see there are independent like polities that aren't like aligned with socialism, quote unquote. You know, Iran is a good example of that, that for the needs of imperialism and also like colonialism and also like, you know, ideology does play a role, ethnic hatred, religious hatred, but you know, they serve the interests of these things. We pursue war, and you know, Trump, not very good at hiding the reasoning, loves to talk about the oil. And that's just straight out of fucking Lenin right there.
Yeah. I do appreciate that about Trump, is that he just says it.
Oh yeah, well, it's something that that Lenin identifies as well. Like, you know, and I'm paraphrasing him, of course, here. Like, bourgeois scholars and publicists defend imperialism obliquely with their yapping about reform. Fewer are the real cynical freaks who are opposed even to reform, and that's, you know, Trump to a T, right?
That's a direct Lenin quote, actually. Cynical freaks.
He would say that. Honestly, I could see him.
Yeah.
Well, he then just kind of wraps things up in chapter 10 really by restating a lot of his points, by hammering down, hey, fuck you if you're a liberal who wants kinder imperialism or is doing the thing where you're pointing out other countries' flaws but not your own. He like calls out France for like publishing papers about like, you know, England's atrocities in South Africa, and he's like, interesting, so you're going to release your colonies?
He points out as well that, like, yeah, like any you know, quote unquote anti-imperialist critique, to drag it back to, like, you know, chapter 9 a little bit, any like anti-imperialist critique has to have at its core the connection between imperialism and monopoly, right? Between the development of finance capital and the conquest that it incentivizes, right? You know, like, and he gives as an example, okay, like, you know, there were people who self-identified as anti-imperialists because the United States was annexing foreign territories, and, you know, we betrayed Emilio Aguinaldo when we promised him an independent Philippines and then didn't give it to him, right? But again, like, your critique is moot if you don't recognize the economic base driving this whole thing. If you, like Kautsky, consider imperialism as this, you know, gauche policy choice rather than, you know, a conclusion you arrive at if you want to, indeed, if you have to, again, make the line go up.
Make line go up.
And
I love I love a little numbered. I love a bullet point. I love a number, a list. And so, like, he kind of kicks off chapter 10, you know, yeah, like you said, like with a summary. We've got this little list. It's four little points here to just kind of go back and reiterate everything. Monopoly rose out of the concentration of production at the very advanced stage of capitalism, and he mentions the cartels, the syndicates, and the trusts. Number two is monopolies have accelerated the capture of the most important sources of raw materials. And he mentions coal and iron specifically because this is, the development of industry at this time. Number three, monopoly has sprung from the banks, right? So this is where we get that finance capital combining with these trusts. And then number four, monopoly has grown out of colonial policy.
Right.
So colonialism interacting with these things and combining just this like fucking unstoppable oppressive beast that we know today.
Well, and this is where we end up with, and this really is mainly highlighted in the 1920 version that releases in German and French, where Lenin kind of identifies a thing where he kind of breaks with Marx a little bit, and he refines this more in the Bolshevik paper, and this gets discussed elsewhere, where he basically says, okay, so in original Marxist conception, pre-imperialism being formalized as a system, Marx was like, okay, obviously the place with the most developed, most powerful, most educated proletariat is going to be the place that the socialist revolution kicks off first. So Marx is eyeing like Germany, England, the United States. Uh, that doesn't happen, obviously. And Lenin is like, actually, because of imperialist super profits, Marx was seeing this math that was like understandable that these people are going to get so educated, they're going to build so much stuff, and then all of a sudden their state is going to be like, fuck you, your wages are going down this year and down this year and down this year because of line go up.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they found other ways to make line go up and can buy these workers off, can do social policies, can do, things like that, some level of a truce between labor and capital. Actually, it is the weak links, quote unquote. It is actually the most exploited places where the revolutions will kick off first. And he is predicting Russia among those. Russia, while not among the most exploited in the world, it certainly was in Africa, was a country that was a debtor state to these European powers. Most of its industry was actually owned by foreign capitalists. It was backwards in quite a lot of ways. Obviously, we get kicked around in wars. And so he was like, this is actually the weak link where this is going to kick off. And lo and behold, where does the socialist revolution kick off? It kicks off in Russia, it kicks off in China, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Cuba, across Africa, et cetera, et cetera. That is actually what happens. And to this day, where do we see the most aggressive and effective resistance against empire? It is unfortunately not inside the empire, though we should continue to try to build that resistance. It is in these peripheries that deal with the most exploitation. And that comes with a lot of contradictions and a lot of problems, like, for instance, not having a fully developed capitalist economy when a socialist party takes over, which is a tough thing to do.
It's tough, yeah.
But that's fucking history, baby.
Yeah. Marx failed to consider how much people in the West like their little treats.
Yes. We once said, like 2 years ago, Marx failed to consider the Nintendo Switch, and that's a joke, but it's kind of true.
It's kind of true. Yeah. Marx failed to consider iPhone.
Marx could not have conceived of Donkey Kong Bonanza for the Switch 2. You can give Pauline little outfits. It's fun.
Is Pauline the Lady Kong?
No, she's the lady. She's a human lady that like rides on Kong's shoulder and helps him out, and she sings.
Yeah, we're worth noting Pauline is like the girl you're saving in the original like Donkey Kong arcade game, right? Not Princess Peach, just somebody else named like Pauline. And they bring her back later on, I believe, for Super Mario Odyssey.
Yes, she's the mayor of New Dunk City in that game. Peach, of course, will be executed with the rest of the monarchs and capitalists when the revolution comes as a member of the aristocracy. But Pauline is a solid civil servant. We support Pauline.
I think the Toads can be effectively rusticated, but not her.
I agree. I think. Do we think Bowser's invasion was historically progressive?
Yes. Bowser has his chauvinisms, but that's why they call it critical support.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, what then shall we do? Okay, we know we continue to live in the era of imperialism. It has evolved. We talked about Nkrumah has wrote about neocolonialism, the way imperialism isn't always just direct domination by, military force, though that still happens quite often. There's a lot of complicated methods. What then shall we do? Most of our listeners are American, not all. Some of our listeners live in the global South. But what then is the task of people both in the global south and here in the global north?
Well, isn't that the $1,000,000 question?
A lot more than that.
Yeah.
$1 million in Lenin's day. Now it's
Right.
the bajillion trillion dollar question.
Yeah.
Yeah, organize.
Yeah, organize, yeah.
Yeah, organize, agitate, build networks of support and of sustainability that as nearly as possible render irrelevant the buying off of our labor aristocracy, right, or the bourgeoisification of our proletariat into a labor aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
There was a type of individual in Russia that gets briefly referenced in this book. He talks about it more in other works like State and Revolution. That was like, well, because the math is there, eventually socialism will emerge and we don't really need to do anything about it. It's just going to happen, right?
I don't know about
that was kind of a take. Oh, well, things are going to consolidate and things are whatever. It's going to socialize. It's going to be fine. No, actually. At the end of the day, despite historical trends, the world is still made up of historical actors who still have to do things. The working class does not automatically understand its historical mission. That is not a thing that happens on its own. We will talk about Gramsci eventually, who spent 20 years in prison being like, why the fuck did the Italian working class either stand aside or side with people who actively hate them?
Right.
We don't have time to get into that, but that's the thing. It's ideology. It's hegemony. We have to break that up in our own ways, and that's going to be different depending where you are. In the global south, there's plenty of work to be done on your states and your countries, depending where you live. There's also sites of direct resistance all around the world. Iran is currently the big flashpoint, but there's many. We have to stand with those projects, even when they're incomplete, even when they're deserving of criticism. We can even say, oh, I don't like that, and yet they are standing against empire. That is a worthwhile thing to do that we'll continue to do.
Yes.
And we need to fucking organize in our own countries, not abstractly, but towards an actual project. And we can never, ever forget the imperialist angle of things while we're talking. If we should talk all day about public housing in our country. We should talk all day about food in our country. We should talk all day about medicine. That, of course. But we also have to talk about what our country is doing to other countries, or we will become, as Lenin calls, social chauvinists. We will build a utopia on the backs of O'Millis children, and we do not want that to be the case.
Right. And part of that is that education aspect, because a lot of Americans actually don't understand how much benefit we get from the global south. How even though things suck here bad, the treats that we do have are because of imperialism.
Yes.
And the materials it takes to build a guillotine are quite cheap.
Yeah, it's very simple. I was thinking about this all day today. If okay, maybe patriarchy hurts men, but any way that it does hurt men is overwhelmingly outweighed by the material benefit of having women to subjugate and extract labor and sex from, right? Okay, maybe white supremacy hurts white people in some incidental ways, but again, at least you're not a non-white underclass that institutionally has much less recourse to addressing discrimination and righting wrongs than white people do. And in much the same way, right? We can't organize on the basis of our Americanness, right? We cannot, we cannot fight for a liberated, American working class per se, because, it's on the basis of exclusion of everybody else, of the global south, from the status of, receiving super profits in, whatever way we do.
I saw a kind of joke, kind of serious today, Lenore, that was connected to this by someone who was quoting a serious analysis that was important of the ruling from the Supreme Court, the anti-trans ruling, where someone's like, this will hurt cis people too, right? And it will, of course. But a trans person quoted it and said, I hope so.
That's the thing. That's unspoken in and I think a lot of the time it's out of ignorance, that this is unspoken. But materially, does it really matter? You should be resisting this on the basis that the most vulnerable people in the equation are the ones being harmed first by this.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I exist at like, I have access to resources, support, personally that, most trans people in my position do not. If the U.S. ruling class has its way, I will be among the last living trans people, which is why I'm talking about it now.
Right.
I just wanted to add one little thing because I don't think that we have mentioned it. The U.S. is a colonial project. We understand this, that the settlers came here, in the 1400s or whatever, and spent centuries massacring and genociding the people that were already here, and then built this fucked up society on that land. And that when we talk about what is to be done, a large part of that is including the liberation of the land that we live under right now, or that we live on right now.
Yes.
Liberating it and returning it to the rightful owners of that land, the people that are still here, because they are not all gone. They are very much still here, although their numbers are much smaller than they should be. And so we have to remember that the U.S. is a colonial project in itself, even though we are now also an imperialist nation. Like, both things are true at once here. And it's one of those things that's hard to get Americans to wrap their fucking little brains around. But like, when we talk about liberating the working class here, we have to also talk about returning this land to its rightful owners.
Yes. We too are a prison house of nations, the various indigenous nations, the Black nation, the Chicano nation, any number of peoples, under the yoke of colonialism at home, imperialism abroad.
It's as that one Maoist meme says, it's Lenin flying in the air with glowing eyes and a gun. He says, "Shut up, crackers, and get to work."
It's exactly that.
He's speaking to me. Let's get some work done. Let's make things different in the ways we can, and let's make people aware of what we're doing, and that a better world is possible. We don't have to go back to fucking, competition. Oh, monopoly capital's so bad. Let's break up the corporations for the nth time. No, how about we take over the corporations and all the good stuff we like about them, all the cool stuff. We can make it better. We can control it. It can be ours mutually, collectively. We can be proud of that shit. We can share it around, and then we won't have trillionaires. We'll, self-determination. It's a very beautiful thing. Yeah. Well, I think that's what we have to say on this book. It's still worth reading. I will link a free link to it in the show notes with the other sources if you'd like to read it yourself. Thank you so much for listening. This nonfiction half is a new development of ours. We would love to hear your feedback, books that you'd be interested in. Of course, you can always recommend books on the Patreon, where we have our monthly poll, and also just DM it to us, email it to us. We love to hear from it. Let us know if you have any questions. We're new. Jen's not, but Lenore and I are new at discussing theory like this. So that's also something that we want to work on and get as good at as possible. So we appreciate you tremendously. I do not know our fiction book for next week, but I know we have our nonfiction book for the week after, right? What is that?
Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis. Very
Let's
excited
go
to talk about this. And we have a guest. Should we plug our guest, or should it be a surprise?
Let's maybe keep it a surprise for the moment.
You'll have to come and find out.
You have to.
But I will. Okay, here's a teaser. Our guest is one of Lenore and I's co-hosts from Half the Sky podcast. So by the time you're listening to this, you can go and listen to the first 3 episodes of Half the Sky. So,
and though the links will get very long, that will also be linked in the show notes below.
Yes, I believe it's episode 3 about not the gender one.
Beauty standards.
Yeah, beauty standards under patriarchy and capitalism. Yes, that will be cross promoted on our feed later on in this week. So
absolutely,
give that a listen.
Absolutely. Well, Lenore, Jen, do we have anything else?
No, I'm hungry.
Okay.
Same.
Well, let me see. Let's see. I can wrap this up. Fuck Kautsky. You punk ass bitch.
You punk ass little sniveling weasel.
Yeah, fuck Cecil Rhodes. I'm gonna kick you in the ribs. Imperialism's bad. You don't have to do it, folks. They're calling They're calling it imperialism. They're saying it's a good idea. It's not. It leads to more conflict between nations. It can lead to the mutual destruction of the contending classes.
Oh my goodness,
That's not
Lenny.
We have to turn imperialist war into civil war, folks. That's what I'm telling people.
Kautsky says trade with Britain's Egyptian colony would have grown more without military occupation. And sure, but that doesn't matter. That's not how it happened, folks, is it? Is it?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
You have a good one, everybody. Bye.
And here he sends silly letters, Kautsky does.
Pages upon pages, words of wisdom from other workers' brow. Got my nose to
They had a 3-for-1 deal at Walmart on Diet Pepsi, so
Diet Pepsi.
I love Diet Pepsi. Please
Really?
cut this from the podcast, Ryan. The Georgia listeners will kill me.
Joe.